When we speak about fasting, most people think immediately about abstaining from food. They imagine an empty plate, a growling stomach, and the discipline of denying physical appetite. But the truth is, the deeper fast, the one that transforms, is not from bread or water, it is from noise. It is from distraction. It is from everything that drowns out the voice of God in your spirit. The first purpose of spiritual fasting is the call into silence, not a silence that is empty, but a silence that is sacred. A silence that heals, a silence that allows you to finally hear what heaven has been whispering while the world kept you busy. We live in an age of constant stimulation, every moment filled with the hum of technology, the chatter of comparison, the noise of opinions. And we become so accustomed to the sound of distraction that the absence of it feels uncomfortable. But fasting invites you to step away from that noise. It asks you to turn off what entertains you so you can tune into what enlightens you. The hunger of the body becomes a reminder that the soul has been starving for something far deeper: peace, clarity, direction. When you fast, you're not just skipping meals, you're making space. Space for reflection, for realignment, for revelation. You are saying, God, I've been so surrounded by sound that I forgot what your stillness feels like. And in that stillness, you begin to notice things that had been invisible. You start to sense emotions that you had buried, thoughts that you had ignored, and whispers from God that were once lost in the static of your busy mind. Fasting pulls you into the quiet chambers of your soul, where truth lies uncluttered by performance or pretense. It is the sacred return to the inner sanctuary where you meet the divine face to face. Silence has a way of revealing what's really going on inside. When there's no noise to distract you, your fears start speaking. Your insecurities start echoing. Your wounds start reminding you they haven't healed yet. But don't be afraid of that silence, because God does His best work in the spaces we try to avoid. Fasting exposes what's been hidden, not to shame you, but to free you. It confronts your inner chaos with divine calm. It teaches you that peace isn't the absence of conflict, but the awareness of God in the midst of it. In that quiet space, something powerful begins to happen. You start to see how much of your identity has been tied to activity, to doing, producing, achieving. And when you stop, you start to wonder, who am I when I'm not busy? That's when God steps in and whispers, you are mine. Not because of what you do, but because of who I am in you. The fast becomes less about giving up and more about receiving revelation, receiving renewal, receiving rest for your weary soul. The human spirit was never designed to live in constant motion. Just as the body needs rest between work, the soul needs silence between seasons. Fasting gives your soul a Sabbath. It reminds you that stillness is not laziness, it is alignment. And alignment is where power flows. You can't hear divine instruction if your life is filled with interruption. You can't sense divine timing if you're always rushing to meet your own. The silence of fasting restores that sensitivity. It sharpens your inner ear so that when God speaks, you recognize His tone immediately. In those quiet hours, when the hunger pangs begin to rise, you start to realize they are not just physical cravings, they are signals. They remind you that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Your spirit begins to awaken to a new kind of hunger, a hunger for truth, for wisdom, for communion. You discover that the true satisfaction comes not from what fills your stomach, but from what fills your soul. And when you come out of that stillness, you see differently, you walk differently, you speak differently, because now you are moving from a centered place, a place of divine awareness. You've learned that power is not always loud, that revelation doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it comes as a whisper that only silence can capture. So when you fast, don't just close the refrigerator, close the noise, shut off the distractions. Step away from the performance of life long enough to rediscover the presence of God, because if you can master the art of silence, you can master the strength of the Spirit. And when the world grows loud again, as it always does, you'll know where to return. To that inner sanctuary, that sacred quiet, where the voice of God still waits. Because every true fast begins with silence, and every true transformation begins with listening. Closing reflection. If you can't hear God in the silence, you won't recognize Him in the storm. So let the silence train your spirit, for in the quiet, purpose is born. When you begin to fast, something extraordinary happens beneath the surface. You think you're just quieting the flesh, but God is actually awakening your spirit. The hunger you feel in your body becomes a mirror that reflects the hunger that's been living deep inside your soul. You start realizing that while your stomach was full, your heart was starving. You were feeding your body, but your spirit was malnourished. And when you take away what the flesh depends on, you begin to discover what the soul truly needs. Spiritual fasting is not about deprivation. It's about purification. It's not punishment, it's preparation. It is God's way of detoxing the soul from everything that clouds your discernment and dulls your spiritual senses. We are so often filled with the residue of what we've consumed, not just food, but emotions, opinions, negativity, fear. Every conversation you have, every image you see, every word spoken over you leaves an imprint on your inner life. And if you never pause to cleanse that inner space, your soul becomes congested with clutter that blocks divine flow. When you fast, you're clearing the channels of your consciousness. You're saying to your mind, be still, and to your spirit, come alive. That's why fasting can feel uncomfortable at first, because detoxification is never pretty. When the body releases toxins, it protests. When the soul releases pride, anger, and self-deception, it protests too. You'll notice thoughts you haven't faced, emotions you've ignored, pain you've suppressed. But don't run from that exposure, because healing always starts with revelation. God cannot cleanse what you keep concealed. There's something deeply psychological about fasting. It reveals the attachments you didn't know had power over you. The cravings, the habits, the impulses, they start to show themselves for what they are, mechanisms of control. You realize how often you've used comfort to numb conviction, how easily you've substituted activity for intimacy. Fasting breaks that pattern. It interrupts the automatic reflexes that keep you disconnected from spiritual awareness. It's a confrontation between who you've become and who you're meant to be. And in that confrontation, something beautiful begins to happen. Consciousness awakens. The fog lifts. Your thoughts become clearer, sharper, more attuned to truth. You start seeing the difference between what's urgent and what's important, between what feels good and what is good, between what's temporary and what's eternal. The hunger that once made you restless now becomes a rhythm that reminds you to look inward instead of outward for satisfaction. When the physical appetite weakens, the spiritual appetite strengthens. Your sensitivity to the Spirit heightens, and you begin to discern divine patterns in what once seemed random. It's as if the static of the natural world fades, and suddenly you can hear frequencies of revelation that were always there, you just couldn't tune in before. Fasting doesn't bring God closer. It brings you into alignment with Him. It removes the interference so His voice can resonate clearly in your soul. And let's be honest, the hardest person to face in the fast isn't the devil, it's you. Because fasting strips away your defenses. It pulls back the layers of distraction and makes you confront what you've been hiding behind productivity, entertainment, or even prayer without presence. It's one thing to talk to God. It's another thing to let Him talk to you about the parts of yourself you'd rather not see. Fasting teaches you to face yourself, your fears, your motives, your illusions, and allow grace to reshape them. There's a philosophical depth to fasting that often goes unnoticed. It's not only an act of faith, but also an exercise in awareness. It trains the mind to detach from illusion and return to essence. It's the practice of remembering that you are not your cravings, not your emotions, not your achievements. You are a spirit housed in flesh, designed to be ruled by purpose, not by appetite. When you grasp that truth, your whole perspective shifts. You stop living reactively and start living intentionally. As the body grows weaker, the illusion of control fades and humility begins to rise. That humility becomes the soil where transformation grows. Because only a humble heart can be purified, only an empty vessel can be filled. Fasting humbles you until all that remains is the core of who you are before God, unmasked, unfiltered, unpretending. It's in that vulnerability that the greatest strength is born. And when you come out of that place, you are not the same. The world looks familiar, but you see it differently. You see with clarity instead of confusion. You move with purpose instead of panic. You speak with conviction instead of noise because your consciousness has been awakened. You have tasted something eternal, and nothing temporary will ever satisfy you the same way again. Asterisk, asterisk, closing reflection. Asterisk, asterisk, every hunger has a voice, but not every voice deserves to be fed. When you fast, you learn which hunger leads you to God and which one keeps you from Him. Feed the one that awakens your soul and let the rest go. When we talk about spiritual fasting, many people assume it's a way to get God's attention, as if the act itself makes Him more likely to move on our behalf. But fasting is not a way to manipulate heaven. It's a way to align with it. The true power of fasting is not in changing God's mind, it's in transforming yours. Because when you fast, you're not trying to pull God into your situation, you're allowing Him to pull you into His will. You stop trying to make Him fit into your plan and start allowing your life to fit into His divine rhythm. Alignment is a word that speaks to balance, to harmony, to being in step with something greater than yourself. When your car's wheels are out of alignment, it still moves, but it drifts, it resists control, it wears down unevenly. The same is true for your soul. When your inner life is out of alignment with the will of God, you can still move, but you move with unnecessary struggle. You fight battles that aren't yours. You chase goals that don't fulfill you. You work harder but feel emptier. Fasting brings everything back into order. It restores spiritual symmetry. It centers your heart around what matters most. When you fast, you are telling your desires, you don't drive anymore. You're telling your fears, you don't get to steer this vehicle. You're handing the keys back to the Spirit and saying, lead me. And that's not easy because alignment always begins with surrender. You cannot align yourself with divine will while holding on to your own agenda. Fasting is a sacred act of letting go, of saying, God, even if you don't give me what I want, give me what I need. It's the courage to trade control for clarity, desire for direction, and comfort for calling. There's something deeply psychological about this process. The human mind craves control. It wants certainty. It wants predictability. That's why fasting feels so radical. It disrupts that illusion of control. It exposes how much of your faith has been conditional on outcomes, not obedience. You begin to see how often your prayers were negotiations instead of surrender. And when that realization hits, it humbles you. Because you begin to understand that God doesn't need your effort, He desires your alignment. He's not asking for your performance, He's asking for your posture. The greatest revelations come when your posture shifts from striving to surrender. You stop trying to make things happen in your own strength and start aligning yourself with what's already happening in the Spirit. That's when fasting moves from ritual to relationship. It's no longer about deprivation. It's about discernment. You begin to sense that your delays aren't denials, they're divine timing. You start realizing that God's no isn't rejection, it's redirection. You stop fighting to be seen and start fighting to stay centered. When you come into alignment, prayer feels different. Worship feels different. Even the way you face your problems feels different. You stop reacting to life and start responding from wisdom. Because when you are aligned, peace becomes your foundation. You don't panic when storms come because you know the one who calms them lives within you. You stop trying to force doors open because you understand that aligned hearts don't need to chase, they attract what's meant for them. Philosophically, alignment is a restoration of order between the seen and unseen. It's when the inner world and outer world start speaking the same language, when your intentions match your actions, when your values match your behavior. Fasting brings that integration. It silences the noise of the flesh long enough for your soul to hear its true compass again. You begin to operate from purpose instead of impulse. You make decisions that reflect conviction rather than convenience. Alignment doesn't mean ease, it means accuracy. It means being precisely where God wants you, even if that place feels uncomfortable, because the right position is always more powerful than the easy one. Fasting teaches you to choose obedience over outcome, to stay still when God says wait, and to move when He says go. It conditions your spirit to trust His rhythm more than your own reasoning, and when that alignment happens, something shifts inside you. You stop chasing validation because you realize you're already approved. You stop doubting your purpose because you feel His presence guiding your every step. You stop striving to prove your worth because you finally understand being aligned with His will is the greatest expression of worthiness there is. The truth is, alignment is not a destination, it's a daily decision. Every morning you wake up, your soul has to choose who it will follow, the hunger of the flesh or the direction of the spirit. Fasting simply makes that choice clearer. It trains your heart to move in rhythm with heaven, to walk in step with peace, and to breathe in sync with divine purpose. Closing reflection. When your will and God's will finally align, life stops feeling like resistance and starts flowing like revelation. The power you seek is not in getting your way, it's in walking His. There comes a moment in every fast when the struggle intensifies, when your body begins to ache, your mind begins to wander, and your will feels weak. It's the moment when everything in you screams to quit. And it's right there, in that invisible tension, that the real work of the fast begins. Because fasting isn't just a discipline of abstaining, it's a confrontation with your inner resistance. It's the place where you discover how deeply you crave control, how easily you depend on comfort, and how hard surrender really is. You see, the fast doesn't just expose your appetite, it exposes your attachments. It reveals the silent wars that rage inside you, the conflict between the flesh and the spirit, between desire and devotion, between comfort and calling. We often think the hardest battles are fought in the world around us, but the fiercest wars are the ones that unfold in the unseen landscape of the heart. Every temptation to give up, every urge to return to what's familiar, is not just hunger, it's a test of surrender. The flesh wants to dominate, to dictate your direction, to have the final say. But the Spirit is calling you higher, to yield, to trust, to release control. This is not a war of noise, it's a war of will. The battleground is not external, it's internal. You may not hear swords clashing or armies marching, but within you a quiet revolution is taking place, the dethroning of the ego so the spirit can reign. And the truth is, surrender doesn't come naturally. We're conditioned to fight, to fix, to figure everything out. We associate strength with control, as if letting go somehow means losing. But in the kingdom of God, the order is reversed. What feels like defeat is often the door to victory. What looks like weakness is actually where divine power begins to flow, because God cannot fill what you insist on controlling. He cannot move through what you refuse to release. This is the paradox of fasting. While your body grows weaker, your spirit grows stronger. Every time you resist the impulse to break the fast, you strengthen your inner resolve. Every time you choose prayer over distraction, you fortify your spirit. Every time you choose stillness over struggle, you align yourself with divine rhythm. You begin to realize that power isn't always expressed through action. Sometimes it's revealed in restraint. Psychologically, fasting teaches the mind a lesson the body can't ignore, that you are not ruled by your impulses. You are not a slave to appetite or emotion. You are a being of intention, of divine will, created to master the self rather than be mastered by it. And when you reach that space, when the war quiets down, when the flesh finally bows to the spirit, a strange peace begins to rise within you. It's the peace that comes from surrender, the calm that only alignment can bring. Spiritually, this surrender is what breaks strongholds, because the enemy has no weapon against a yielded heart. He can't manipulate what's already been handed over to God. He can't distract a mind that's already decided to obey. When you surrender, you stop fighting on the wrong battlefield. You stop wrestling with what's beyond your control and start winning where it truly matters inside. That's where God's power meets your humility. That's where heaven touches earth. And it's not just about winning a moment. It's about becoming a different kind of person. Because once you've experienced strength through surrender, you carry that awareness into every other part of your life. You stop overreacting to pressure because you've already learned peace under tension. You stop fearing loss because you've discovered gain in letting go. You stop chasing significance because you've found it in submission. Philosophically, this is one of the greatest truths of spiritual life. Freedom is not found in having more control, but in needing less of it. Fasting rewires your perspective. It teaches you that real authority comes from alignment, not ambition. You don't need to dominate your circumstances. You need to dwell in divine order, because when you are surrendered, God fights differently through you. Your silence becomes strategy. Your restraint becomes resistance. Your weakness becomes weaponry. The invisible battle of fasting isn't about proving your strength, it's about acknowledging His. It's learning to trust that even when you feel empty, God is filling you. Even when you feel unseen, He is shaping you. Even when you feel powerless, He is empowering you. Every hunger pang, every moment of temptation is not a sign of failure. It's a reminder that transformation is happening at a level you can't yet perceive. So don't run from the struggle, it's sacred. Don't despise the tension, it's training. God is teaching you how to surrender and still stand, how to yield and still be strong, how to bow and still rise in power. Because the victory of fasting is not won by fighting harder, but by trusting deeper. Asterisk, asterisk, closing reflection. Asterisk, asterisk, the battle you're fighting isn't trying to destroy you, it's trying to reveal you. Surrender doesn't mean you've lost the war. It means you've finally given God permission to win it through you. When the fast comes to an end, you quickly realize something powerful. You're not the same person who began it. Somewhere between the hunger and the stillness, between the surrender and the silence, something inside of you shifted. It's subtle at first, a peace where there used to be panic, a sense of clarity where confusion once lived. But as you step back into the rhythm of daily life, you notice the difference. The noise that once overwhelmed you doesn't hold the same power. The distractions that used to define you don't pull you the same way. Because fasting doesn't just cleanse the body, it repositions the spirit. Every genuine fast ends with a sense of renewal, a feeling that the old you has been stripped away and something more centered has emerged. It's like the fog that once clouded your mind finally lifted. The same circumstances may still exist, but your perception of them is transformed. That's the real miracle, not that your surroundings change, but that you do. You begin to see life through a spiritual lens rather than a survival one. The situations that used to shake you now shape you. What once felt like chaos now feels like preparation. Because fasting doesn't just make you stronger, it makes you still enough to see clearly. You see, clarity is one of the greatest gifts of fasting. When your mind is uncluttered and your heart is purified, the voice of God becomes unmistakable. You don't second, guess his direction like you used to. You stop chasing every opportunity and start discerning the ones that carry purpose. You become more intentional about your relationships, your words, your habits. Fasting reorders your inner world so that your external world begins to align with divine purpose. What was once scattered now finds rhythm. What was once impulsive becomes guided. This repositioning is not accidental, it's the fruit of awareness, because fasting makes you conscious again, conscious of your motives, conscious of your time, conscious of the divine thread that weaves through your life even in the mundane moments. It trains your spirit to live awake. Before, you may have prayed reactively only when things went wrong. But after fasting, prayer becomes the atmosphere you breathe. Worship stops being an event and starts being a state of being. You find yourself living with an internal posture of expectancy, not anxiety, but assurance. Psychologically, fasting resets your perspective on dependency. When you've learned that you can live without what you thought you couldn't, something inside of you stabilizes. You realize that peace doesn't come from what you have, it comes from what you trust. You discover that joy doesn't depend on external pleasure but on internal alignment. That's why when you emerge from a fast, you feel lighter not just physically but spiritually. The burdens that once weighed you down no longer fit who you've become. The fast didn't just empty your stomach, it emptied your spirit of fear, doubt, and distraction. Spiritually, fasting reawakens your faith. It pulls you out of the routine of religion and into the rhythm of revelation. You remember what it feels like to depend on God again. You realize that faith isn't about getting everything you want, it's about trusting God enough to believe that everything He allows has meaning. That's why the fast renews your fire, because when you've walked through the wilderness of hunger and come out filled with peace, you carry a confidence that can't be shaken by circumstance. You've tasted the faithfulness of God in the quiet, and now you walk with the boldness of someone who knows His presence doesn't fade when the fast ends, it follows you. Philosophically, the fast redefines your relationship with purpose. It strips life down to its essentials and forces you to ask, why am I doing what I'm doing? Who am I becoming through this? It brings you back to the simplicity of truth. You are not here just to survive, you are here to evolve. Every spiritual discipline, every sacrifice, every silent night of wrestling is designed to transform you from the inside out. You start to live with a sense of destiny again. You stop existing by default and start living by design. That's the essence of spiritual repositioning, to step back into life not as the person who started the fast, but as the person it was meant to reveal. And when you live from that renewed place, your presence itself becomes a testimony. You carry peace that can't be explained. You walk with confidence that doesn't come from circumstance. People sense something different about you not because you've become louder, but because you've become clearer. You've learned that power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it radiates quietly from a heart that's been refined by discipline. So as you come out of the fast, don't rush to fill the silence you've just created. Don't drown out the stillness that birthed your clarity. Carry it with you. Let it shape your conversations, your decisions, your reactions, because the greatest proof of transformation is consistency after revelation. The goal of fasting is not to return to normal, it's to redefine it. *** closing reflection. *** you didn't fast to escape life, you fasted to see it differently. Now that you see with spiritual eyes, walk like someone who knows that clarity is the greatest strength of all. When the fast is over and life resumes its rhythm, something profound happens. You stand at a crossroads between revelation and responsibility. You've received insight, you've touched depth, you've felt the stripping away of the unnecessary and the awakening of what's eternal within you. But now comes the true test. What will you do with what you've seen? Because fasting is not an escape from life. It is preparation for it. The silence was not meant to isolate you. It was meant to equip you. The purpose of spiritual fasting is not just to bring you closer to God in a moment of consecration, but to send you back into the world carrying the fragrance of transformation. When you fast, God doesn't just change your appetite, He changes your assignment. You begin to sense that your life is not random, it is intentional. The clarity that fasting brings exposes every area where you've been living beneath your potential. You start to realize that the fast was never about food, it was about focus. It was never about denying your flesh for the sake of discipline alone. It was about discovering that you were created for divine purpose. And when that realization sinks in, you can no longer go back to living carelessly, because purpose always demands alignment. The power of fasting is not only in what it removes, but in what it reveals. It reveals that purpose is not something you chase. It's something you uncover when the noise of distraction is silenced. It's already been placed within you. Fasting just clears the fog so you can finally see it. It awakens your spiritual intuition, that inner awareness that tells you when something is right even before you can explain why. It makes you sensitive to divine timing, discerning enough to know when to move and when to wait. Because purpose is not found in constant motion, it's found in alignment with divine rhythm. Think about it. Every great transformation in Scripture followed a moment of separation. Moses fasted on the mountain and came down carrying revelation. Elijah fasted in the wilderness and emerged with renewed power. Jesus fasted in the desert and began his public ministry with divine authority. The pattern hasn't changed. Every fast births a new dimension of purpose. Every moment of consecration creates capacity for new assignment. When you fast, God doesn't just feed your spirit, He refocuses your destiny. But here's the part we often overlook. The fulfillment of purpose doesn't come automatically after the fast. It requires you to walk out what was revealed in the silence. It requires the courage to live differently once you've seen differently, because clarity without action is just conviction without commitment. The purpose of revelation is transformation, not admiration. You were not called to admire what God showed you in the fast, you were called to embody it. Psychologically, fasting rewires the way you interpret struggle. You stop seeing resistance as rejection and start recognizing it as refinement. You begin to understand that everything you went through, every hunger pain, every moment of weakness, every tear shed in silence was building the endurance required for your next season. Fasting strengthens not just your spirit, but your resilience. It trains your emotions to serve your mission rather than sabotage it. You become emotionally anchored, no longer tossed by the waves of uncertainty, because your confidence now comes from something deeper than comfort. It comes from calling. Philosophically, fasting teaches that purpose is not pleasure-centered, it's principle-centered. It calls you to live from the inside out. It asks you to stop seeking validation from the world and start listening to the quiet affirmation of the spirit within. You realize that purpose doesn't always shout, sometimes it whispers in the quiet conviction of your heart. And when you start honoring that inner voice, your life begins to align with divine flow. You stop striving to make things happen and start allowing them to unfold under the guidance of wisdom. And here's the beauty of it all: when you live from that place of alignment, everything about you changes. You start to attract peace where you used to invite chaos. You speak differently, you walk differently, you respond differently. People might not understand what changed, but they can feel it. You've become grounded, centered, purposeful, because you're no longer living to be seen, you're living to serve asterisk. And that is the highest expression of fasting, when what was revealed privately becomes visible publicly through your character, your compassion, and your commitment to God's will. Fasting was never meant to end at the table. It's meant to overflow into your daily life. The goal isn't to prove your discipline, but to position your destiny. When you carry the lessons of fasting into your relationships, your work, your decisions, you become a living vessel of divine clarity. You embody purpose with every breath, because now your life is not driven by hunger for things, but hunger for meaning. Asterisk, asterisk, closing reflection. Asterisk, asterisk, you didn't fast just to feel holy, you fasted to become whole. Now walk in that wholeness. Let the clarity you gained become the compass that guides your life. Because when you live from a place of divine purpose, every step becomes sacred, and every moment becomes a continuation of the fast, not of abstaining, but of aligning with what truly matters.